California leftists now trying to cancel math class?
The San Francisco School Board voted to change the names of schools that were named after historical figures.
As he's just one of multiple students who were being told they were not allowed to have flags on their cars.
My name is Mix Cogdill. My pronouns are ze, them, zir, and zirs.
The topic of gender and genitals came up.
If you're not evolving into an anti-racist educator, you're making yourself obsolete.
The district put him on paid administrative leave for praying after games.
So thank you all. We're going to talk about education. And I know we had the funny name of the panel, They're Coming for Your Kids, and I'm sure you saw that little clip of the people marching. We're coming for your kids. But I liked it because my point is that we're not focusing on what's important. So all these other things are distracting. Gender, race, we talk about them because others are talking about them. But the bottom line is kids aren't learning, right? So I'm going to start with you since he made that comment. I was never going to say anything about it, but since he brought it up. You are a big advocate for school choice because it was a success for you individually. So talk about how that changed your life.
Yes, for sure. So growing up, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I hated school, and that's just to really put it mildly. I grew up in a community where selling drugs was normal, dropping out of high school was normal. My mom, brothers, aunts, uncles, I come from a family of high school dropouts. That was pretty much the norm, and that was my destiny as well. My mother, she gave birth to me at 16 years old, and she wanted to still have a life. And so I was the product of that. I did not do well in school from early on, ended up failing the third grade twice, like you heard, because I couldn't read. I was left back to 2 grade levels because each year took a reading assessment. You didn't pass it. We got to, you need to repeat this grade. Took it again, took third grade again. You're still not passing the reading assessment, we're going to leave you behind again. In the 4th grade, I was enrolled in a catch-up program, and this program was to get me caught up to my right grade. I didn't pass that, and that really created this sense of insecurity in me. I felt hopeless. Why should I even try? And that was in elementary school. And all of my outlook on life and education changed the summer before my 6th grade year. The first thing that happened was I began to live with my godmother permanently. Second thing that happened, she found out about the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship. She enrolled me. I got accepted. I started immediately at my church's private school. And this was a small little private school. It had about 100 kids, K through 12. And that's how my life changed.
Wow. So Christy, you're on a board for a charter school. So they love your story. You're on a board for a charter school, and she talked about the importance of school choice. So can you talk a bit about why that's important for you, why that was important for you to kind of help people, help kids kind of achieve, obviously, and what you think the problems are, why there's this desire for people to have options, different options for education. Talk about what they do differently and just what's wrong in education.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I serve as president of the K through 8 charter school here in Phoenix. And I serve because that is where my daughters went to school. They graduated there, K through 8, and they are now in high school. They're adults, 22 and 23 years old. Yeah, I know, geez. Charter, having the opportunity to choose a school, the charter school that they went to, they just blossomed. They blossomed because there were smaller class sizes, because there were teachers that were able to identify greatness in them, identify some weak spots that we needed to work on. And there was a lot of parental interaction, a lot of parental influence. And so I think that's really what made the difference. And one of the things that we did, we were not heavy on homework. We believed family needed family time. They needed to spend family time together. And so we weren't overtaxing the kids with, constantly having to study. They got to be kids. And so one of the other things that you see, so the reason that we need, to your point, we need these options is because you'll have kids that have, it might be autism. We've got specialized schools now that those parents don't have to pay tens of thousands of dollars now because of the ESA program, which is amazing. They can get the therapies that they need, and that therapy can be integrated into the classroom. And speaking of integration, that's another thing that's so great about school choice. In our particular charter school, we integrate the kids that have a different learning style or have a disability of some type, a learning disability. They get to be part of the classroom. So they're learning, and incredible, right? Because the kids become a family. They become used to each other. You get the opportunity to talk about emotional intelligence, okay? The thing is, social emotional learning, right? I mean, that has become the delivery system for CRT, is really what has happened. But what I think people who are constantly opposing SEL don't realize is that we do need to teach emotional intelligence. Kids need to learn self-governance. They need to learn self-awareness. They need to, all those things. But what we don't need is we don't need it to be something that teaches shame. I was so, Shelby talked about shame. And that really is the thing. I'm a little off topic, but that really is what SEL CRT teaches, right? So I'm married to a man who is 99.9% East Indian, okay, according to the blood work. And, in order for that to happen, I'm pretty much the first white person in his entire lineage, right? And so what is the conversation, right? He's the oppressed. I'm the oppressor. I'm the aggressor. What has just happened now? I have just introduced a shame-based conversation. I have said not only to, this is what we're saying to kids, you're not just wrong for what you do, you're wrong for who you are, and you can't change either one of them. Right. So when we have school choice, we don't have to buy into that. We don't have to buy into that. We can teach emotional intelligence without teaching a sense of shame. Right. And is it any wonder that we have mental health issues that are out of control right now?
Right.
So
yeah, I'm gonna have to edit the part you said about letting the kids be a kid in case my son sees it, because he doesn't need to be a kid. He just work all the time. But you eventually passed third grade. I'm gonna stop, I promise. And you ended up working at the DOE for Betsy DeVos. So you got to see a lot of this. So what did you see? What's the reasoning behind that you hear the all-out opposition to giving parents choice for school?
At the federal level?
Yeah, just in general.
The teachers union, public enemy number one. And, we can't have a conversation, to your point, about school choice, about education freedom, without bringing up the opposition, without bringing up the threat to our freedoms. And I also was in the room with Shelby Steele when we were at Oak Parkland.
Hey, she was there too.
I was there too.
Sorry, Captain.
And so somebody else in the room. And but yeah, so to talk about education freedom, you have to talk about the real threat, and that's definitely at the federal level. I can't tell you how many times we wanted to, so yes, at the U.S. Department of Education, go on a school visit. Go visit a school. That's probably the number one role of the U.S. Secretary of Education, is to see America's schools. And the reason why doors were closed was because of the teachers union. They would picket outside of schools and to keep the secretary from entering. The funniest one was we went to visit a school in Nebraska, a private school. We went to this school, visited. The kids were amazing. They all played like violins. They were like so cute. Afterwards, they did a press interview saying, we didn't want Secretary DeVos to come. We do not believe in school choice. She was just pulling our, like, first of all, you're a private school. and all of your kids like are on scholarship. Like, what in the world?
Literally choice. Without choice, you would have 0 students.
Yeah. And it was the funniest thing. We couldn't even get enough of it. We're just like, this is just too funny. And it's because of the teachers unions. And we're talking a lot about, terms like woke and systemic oppression, racism, like all of these bitty terms that the other side uses, and it resonates. And that's something that we don't do on our side. We do not get bit-sized sound bites that are truth and let those resonate. And that's something that I'm doing. So I founded a project called Black Minds Matter, a play on terms there, and at the American Federation for Children to do just that. We're talking about education freedom, liberating Black minds from mental slavery, allowing for more education freedom. And it's those bitty sized terms that we have to clinch on to. We have a lot of truth in our sayings, a lot of truth in our messages, but they get to the bottled down in the policy. And so we have to make our conversation more attractive. And that's something that I really hope to achieve with my project, Black Minds Matter, and then have that seep into a lot of our other reform issues that we have.
Now, you talked about some of the terms they use, and you mentioned CRT. That's why I asked Eric to kind of kick off the focus on the language at the beginning of this. And I said it was going to constantly come up because it's a common theme. And I try to approach this as we keep saying this is not political. Kevin said education is not political, but in today's society, everything becomes political. So you make a really good point. People say, well, before I listen to your point, what's your political beliefs first? Because I want to dismiss you. So I try to get as far away from that as possible because it's all about the kids. I assume that most people care. I mean, teacher union, they have a different goal. So their job is to protect the teachers. So, but for the most part, people care about whether the kids are being successful. And you use these terms. I mention that because I find that one of our biggest problems is not just the gaslighting of the terms, but the fact that we get stuck in this mire of all these terms and we don't talk about what they're there for and how they're failing at it, right? So if you have a majority of kids who can't read and do math at grade level, and they're setting these kids up year after year, generation after generation, to not do well and to struggle, how do we fix that if that's the root of the problem? If we're not even debating that, whether it's a school choice thing, whether it's CRT, whether it's a gender thing, we talk about that stuff ad nauseum. Very rarely do we get in a debate about how kids read and write, how do we make them better, what is the functional and technical things we can do to improve that. So how do we ever plan on fixing it if we don't do that? You know, one of my favorite lines, I love talking to Ian Rowe because he talks about this a lot. He's the only one that I think that keeps beating this drum. So you talk about race and you're talking about equity, right? We need equity. Forget about equality, as Lee said earlier. We need equity because we need to bring these minority kids up, whatever, and the white structure that gives us supremacy, whatever. And Ian goes, hold on. You know, 58% of whites aren't reading at grade level, right? So there are more whites not reading at grade level today than there are reading at grade level. So really what you're asking is to bring blacks up to mediocrity and you're gonna be happy that 42% of blacks can't read. How is that success? And I rarely hear this in debates. What I get is equity and opportunity and these kind of things. So what do you think, Christy, what do you think? And like, how do we fix that? But what do you
Before
think?
you say that, I'm like, I know when I'm in conversation with people, I'm like, we need to compare blacks. We need to compare to Asians. Like, like knocking it out of the park. Like,
And then when we're doing to Asians, they're trying to knock them down.
right. Yeah.
Right. So in New York, you know, I'm in New York, and we have this debate, right, lately in the school, I'm on the school board there, and lately it was the middle school admissions. But it's funny. So it's not even, so I try to get to the root of the issue. So I don't debate whether they're right or wrong. I want to know why you're doing it. So they went from, so they have selective enrollment schools where you used to have to test to get in. Not every school, not your neighborhood school, but the schools that are supposed to be specific for those kids who are excelling. So you needed to test to get in. Well, they scrapped it and went to lottery. Now, whether lottery is good or not isn't the issue. It's the reason they did it. They openly said it was for equity, right? To desegregate the schools was what they said. Right. So my first thought was, well, segregation doesn't exist. It's not segregation. There may be schools that are majority white and majority white, but that's not segregation. Segregation means legally you can't go because you're black and white. But then I'm like, no, Charles, you're not thinking like you normally thought it. Get to the root of the thing. Then I said, well, wait a minute. So you want equity and you want to desegregate the schools because they're segregated. But the kids you want to take out are so-called quote unquote BIPOC kids because they're Asian. So Asians were like 12% of the population. They were 48% of the schools. So to fix the schools, you want to take these excelling, many social economically poor Asian students out of the school to replace them with blacks who may not pass the test because you want to have a racial balance. That doesn't even make sense. So we're not even debating what the issue is, and we're expecting to have a solution at the outcome. So why don't you think, in general, when we're having education debates, we're not debating what works, what doesn't work, phonics versus old word. We're not debating that. We're debating how much race should be in there, how much gender should be in there, all that kind of stuff. So we lose because we're debating the wrong thing. So why don't you think we just cut that off and talk about the solutions?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, to your point, messaging. I think we, by and large, are the worst at messaging.
Speak for yourself.
Use your words, okay?
You.
Set the bar high. No more parental rights. Okay, don't even say it. I don't even know why we call it that. Parental rights in education, parental bill of rights. No, you want family and parental inclusion in education.
They do like inclusion. They like inclusion.
Yeah. We don't think about what we're saying. There's a really great coach who does coaching for this type of thing, for messaging, for people that are running for office. And one of the things she says is, conservatives fight for things. The left fights for people. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. How ironic is that? Because conservative values actually fight for people, but we message it in a way that that's not what they're getting. They're not hearing that. So I think messaging, number one, we got to fix that. We've got to fix the messaging. And you had asked me when we talked on the phone last week, we spend so much time, school choice, the ESA, you can go to wherever you want to go, but what are we going to do about the kids that are trapped in some inner city schools that are very, very dangerous, that are poorly functioning? So, what's the solution to that? And I thought to myself, I'd like to sit here and say 10 steps to making this go away, and it's just like there's probably 10 steps and it is a multi-layered thing, but at the end of the day, some things just have to collapse on themselves. And I'm not trying to be insensitive. I get that the shrapnel from that is kids, but they're already the shrapnel. Did you see this article? Baltimore. One article said 13, one said 23. Either way, it's horrific. Of these schools in Baltimore, 0 had kids, zero students proficient at math. If that's 13 or 23, it is entirely inappropriate.
That's a lot of schools.
Entirely inappropriate. Yep.
Well, one of the things, you can't create a problem this big that took this long to happen because so many people abdicated their responsibility and turned a blind eye and fix it in a week. That's just not going to happen. But I think the first step, like anything else, the first step is admitting you have a problem, right? So, and you made it easier for me because you opened the door, but the school board thing. Obviously, let me preface this to say, I support school choice, because I don't want to seem like I do. Matt and I were talking earlier. I said, my problem is people think that's the solution. So I'll talk to school choice advocates, not Tanisha, but many of them, and I say, this is bad. The sex in school, the violence in school, the suspension rate, they can't read. Yeah, we all agree it's bad. So what should we do? It's like, we need school choice. I said, okay, let me do a little math. Because I got out of school before they stopped teaching math. So 95% of kids in the country go to public school. You want to get that triple that 5%. So, okay. So now you got 15% of kids in choice schools, parochial, private, whatever the case may be. So 85% of kids are still in the public schools. And that's going to fix the schools? Because 15% in the private schools, whatever? What are you going to do about 85% of the kids? They're still coming out of school, defeated and fell and told they're oppressed. So they don't have any agency. They feel bad, so they turn into a life of crime. Or they get passed through and they're given a job that they're not proficient at and they don't do a good job. And so now you got to deal with the dysfunction, right? You got to go to the DMV. You got to deal with the bad service in the restaurant. You can't escape it. Some of them are going to eat through and run for office and be your congressman. Because they may not be that bright, but they know how to speak the language that lifts them up and make people say, yeah, I like that kind of stuff. So you're not avoiding it.
Yeah.
So writing them off isn't going to solve the problem. So I think the first step, Christy, is to admit that we need school choice because it's the right thing. Every parent should have a choice to send their kids where they want to finish.
Yeah.
But we also need to continue to fight for the kids that are in the public schools. You know, I keep bringing up my guy because I love him so much. So Ian. So Ian ran single gender schools in rough neighborhoods in New York, had kids excel, left to open an international baccalaureate school. He opened last year. This is his second year. So the way he's opening it is to have all freshmen, then they go become sophomore and he brings in the class. So he's layering class up. So I'm talking to Ian and I was like, I use him as an example because he's great at what he does. He's passionate, he cares, he wrote the book, he travels, he does all the right things. And I said, Ian, before COVID, how many kids are in public school in New York City? He said, he knew where I was going. Of course, we talk all the time. He said, 1 million, Charles. I said, that's great. So we're going to fix this school thing. You have a wonderful school that's teaching classical liberalism. It's a great school. That's right. We're going to help save these kids. Mostly disadvantaged. Yes, they are. How many kids are in your school? 124, Charles. We're going to save a city of 1 million public school kids with a school with 124 kids. You can't build enough schools. The unions are canceling charters. They won't let you open more schools.
I think we need to reframe what our definition of public education is by saying it's public education, not public school. Then you have private schools, and that's how we're funding those. And then you have charter schools, and that's how we're funding those. Because then we still have all of these different sectors of schools. One of the beautiful things about being here in Arizona is that that bubble is like beginning to be burst with this universal education savings account. And then we can now start conceptualizing what does a new definition of public education look like. It doesn't look like the old definition, which is I'm going to give this money to a public school that's run by the government, it's uniform, it's whatever, and then give money to a private school, earmark some for a public charter school. No, that definition is now changing where we give money to families and they can shop around to whatever type of schooling or education model that best fits their needs. Now that might be a government run program or that might be a privately run program, similar to what we do in every other aspect of our life. And so then we won't have the numbers game of we have 95% of our kids going to a public school. No, we have this number of kids taking advantage of all of these different options. Because even within the public education system, we have choice. There's open enrollment, there's magnet schools, there are arts-based schools. And so we can begin to form different types of education models based on this new type of way of looking at it. And there's this really cool charter school in Florida. They have a virtual school. I'm not virtual. They have a VR school. Their kids totally meet on the Oculus and they like zoom in virtual reality school. Like they don't step foot on, they go on the Oculus. And I think that's pretty cool. So
I think that's great that you're right. It's moving in the right direction. But counterpoint, all that's true. It's better. It's moving in the right direction. But let's sit here and act like there's 162,000 virtual reality schools.
Yeah, but it could.
So they still, but for now, I mean, that's still better than the option. But I'm saying we need to think of the long game and the short game. So next year in New York, so Ian opened the school, now he has a second class. Somebody opens one of those schools, somebody opens what other school? The union's got, the union sued Ian, right? So they fight every one of those. Even when they lose, they got the money. Like, we know we're going to lose, but we hope that you collapse because you don't have enough money to fight. So you fight all that along the way to create an additional 200 spots when you got 100,000 kids. So New York is weird because it's so big. So you bring that down to any other city. So you got a city with 80,000 students, then you got 150 slots, right? So you're still going to have a situation that it's going to take a while for the market to catch up where there's enough spots, even with the money following the kids, where they don't pick the government school. I don't want to pick the government school, but there's 10 slots at that
I
other school.
agree with you in the sense of like,
And some of those other schools are getting woke too, because wokeism is powerful.
well,
We got woke Christian schools. We got woke religion coming up next. We're gonna talk about those woke Christian schools.
because we have, and this is where like I just read an article, the GOP can win in this issue too. Like nobody has cracked the code on the school funding formula. Like nobody understands where the money is going. When the district gets the money and it gets wheedled down to pay for student education, nobody knows how it's being sucked up. You mentioned Baltimore. In Baltimore, I think the per pupil expenditure is like $22K, and they are like, yeah, the kids can't read. And where's all that money going? Nobody knows. But the solution that the alternative, the opposition is constantly given, the only solution is what? More money, more money,
Right.
more money.
That's way worse than your
That's
opportunity.
not. And so
He's on the ballot. I just no. I don't know.
Well, there's another
You
factor.
don't get any more. If you can't perform with what you've got, I mean,
Like you don't get more. So we mentioned the school choice. I mentioned the curriculum and the culture and all that stuff. We can't legislate our way out of it. We need to do those things, but we have to get to the mindset because there's a third factor. We got to be honest. The other one that people talk about even less than the other things, the failing kids and other things, because it's guilting and shame, and so you can't talk about it. But the parents have a role, Christy,
absolutely,
and there are parents who are kind of zoned out, right?
absolutely.
The school is daycare. They assume the school is doing everything, so they take their kid. We did our job. We did our legal and parental obligation. We dropped the kid off at the door of the school, and we picked them up. What do you mean I'm not a good parent? I dropped my kid off, and I picked them up. You're telling me I'm not a great parent. What they learn? I don't know. School stuff. What they do? I don't know. Play with kids. Well, are they doing well? I don't know, I guess. So they don't know what's going on. You be like, I live in the real world, right? I don't have a giant footprint. I'm not a celebrity. I don't know a lot of people, but I probably talk to more people than a lot of the big names you see, because that's all I do. Joe and I were talking about how I get in the Uber, I talk about education and race. Everywhere I go, every person I talk to, I talk about it all the time. I know what regular people think. You will be shocked. They're not woke. In some ways, they're worse. They don't know. One of my favorite examples, I have a friend that worked in education for 20 years. He left and he works in municipal government, right? But he was in education for 20 years. Called me over Thanksgiving, high school friend, just chatting. How's the family? How's things going? It's good. So I see you've been speaking. How's it been going? It's been going pretty good, but it's really hard countering the narrative of what, like, Kendi and them are pushing about racism. He's like, Kendi? I was like, yeah, Ibram Kendi. He's like, who's that? How do you work in education for 20 years and not know who Ibram Kendi is? Are you kidding me? So it's not that they're winning because they have better language.
Right.
They're also winning because normal people are unplugged.
Yes.
We got people who have all these active groups that are here. So you all are fighting every day, good for you. But you need to do whatever you're doing, whatever organization you is, whatever grassroots, talking to your legislator, do not stop it. But I beg you to take 10% of that energy and spend it to talk to everybody in your circle. When you walk into Walmart, now, it doesn't have to be political. What do you think of Trump? That's not what you didn't say. So you notice something on their clothes. You notice they're saying something new. Or did you see that? And once they start talking, react to it. Are you okay? I get in the Uber driver. You know what I asked the Uber driver? It's like, how long you been driving Uber? They tell me how long. And I said, well, what do you think about the argument about whether you should be an employee or an independent contractor? I want to be an independent contractor. I mean, it's not great, but I want to be able to turn it on, work for 2 hours, and turn it off. If I'm an employee, they can tell me when to work. Well, they figure it out. But the legislators don't get it, and the legislators are speaking for them. So you can just say, those people are speaking for you. Yeah, they're going to serve in a restaurant. Do you want to make $20 an hour? Hell no, because I make $50 an hour. No, I don't want to make $20 an hour. I want my tips. And let's be real, I don't claim them up. So you have to talk to regular people. These parents don't know, Chrissy. Did you know that they don't know? Because they don't know.
They don't know.
How many of you knew that the parents didn't know?
The parents need emotional intelligence training.
They do. And they're unplugged. It's not that they don't care. I'm not even talking about bad parents. I'm just like, they got a life and jobs and work and demands and time and they cook and 3 kids. And you get to middle school, when your kids get to middle school, you got an elementary school kid, they're all in different schools and you're running around. They just don't have time.
Right.
So, and they're not coming to this. So you have to go out, each one of you have to go find 10 regular people, 2 family members. You can't use too many because they'll all disown you, but 2 family members, couple Uber drivers, whatever you got to do, co-work. Joe will tell you about ways to talk about at work that's not so toxic, but you got to educate people on this information in a way that they don't think it's so political, or that they just say what they doing. They're teaching the black kids. Like my friends are mostly liberal, but if I tell them that they're teaching the black kids different, they get all taking off the earrings. What they doing? What? They didn't know, right? Because we're not telling them. So the parents, I don't know. How do you think we engage them?
I mean, again, this ridiculous loop keeps coming back around, right? Because it's like, get on the school board, right? It's frustrating.
I'm on the school board,
and I get it.
Let's tell you, they don't come to the meetings, so the parents still don't know. We're going.
Yeah.
That's the same legislation, but people aren't coming.
Yeah, it's the frustrating conversation because like school boards, I memean, you get on a school board and you barely move the needle because you really don't have a ton of power. And you end up finding that, you're moving at the rate of a dripping faucet. It's still frustrating if you're a doer, you just want to get things done. But you can expose.
Yeah.
You can start having you can start saying, hey, $200,000 went to the DEI consultant this year at what, expose.
People care about education. I got a stat here. Okay, go ahead.
No, as I was just kind of brainstorming this with my husband, I said, you and I, we did not raise our kids to say, hey, you need to go into the Chamber of Commerce. That should be your goal in life. Like you should work at the city, we don't do that, right? And yet all of those positions have been infiltrated, right? So I think another layer of this is parents teaching and us teaching parents to have that conversation of, look, public service is actually great, right? It's good to serve others. Why do we serve others? How do we serve others? You know what? It doesn't mean we have to go into ministry. We can come out of the church. It's okay to do that, to come out of the institutionalized church and say, you know what? Hey, youth pastors, do it I brought these up here because I was going to forget the names. This is, and I need my reading glasses, believe it or not, Transformational Technologies Academy. This is you've heard of these guys, right? I think most of their funding is Mike Tyson doing something awesome. He's building schools, private schools in inner cities. They are using not only some of that funding, but they're also using the ESA. Hate to keep coming back to it, but the reality is you can use some of that ESA, okay, to pay for a bus pass. That's the challenge. And you and I were talking about that, is that these kids, they don't have parental support. And they don't have a way to get out of the inner city to find the school that they need to go to. Well, they can use the ESA to buy a bus pass. They can use it to pay for an Uber. I mean, I wouldn't personally put my child in an Uber, but hey, whatever works, right? Getting creative, creating as many, I just believe, look, I probably don't have the most popular opinion, so I speak on my own here, but I would privatize all schools.
We're all about
That's just my opinion. I would privatize all school. First things first, federal has to go.
Right.
The federal government should have nothing to do. It needs to go to the states, But parents, they're helpless. I don't know what to do.
Very important. Another thing you talked about, that's good that he's doing that, but I'm hoping that do some research and find out if Mike Tyson went to the Oprah Winfrey and LeBron James School of Opening Schools, because if so, that doesn't look too good.
Don't worry. Yeah. Also, I have to do a plug for Black Minds Matter. So we have the first and only online directory of Black founded schools on our website, www.blackmindsmatter. And it's a way to kind of change the narrative around school choice, education freedom. Of course, in order to found a school, it's not a public school. And so all of these schools are private, charter, virtual, micro, homeschool. And it's really kind of putting a different spin on Black-owned business. That's such a big thing over the past, decade. There's focusing, and most of the time you hear about the Black-owned coffee shop or the bookstore. It's like, actually, there's some schools that are Black founded. And to talk about that is to talk about education freedom, to highlight, many schools that are community driven, that are serving African American kids, diverse, to talk about true diversity. These are things that's happening in this choice and choice world.
Can I say something about that? The one good thing about the people I kind of consort with, Eric, you and all those other people that I invite, it's because they're really sharp people. They know their stuff. They know about what's going on. So these conversations just go wherever they go based on what you mentioned it, because you mentioned that made me think. So a lot of the narrative in the general woke vein, so from the CRT, SEL types, they're always talking about the cultural relevance, right? And one of the points they make is that you learn better. You need people these kids need people to look like them, all that kind of stuff.
right.
And there's pluses and minuses to that or whatever. But again, you got to get to the core of what they're talking about. Say, okay, so you say black kids will learn better if they have black teachers and they read black material and all that stuff. Oh, I feel like there was a time when they had black
That's right.
teachers and something you did took the pupils away. Oh yeah, that racist integration thing you did. Right, like I wish Shelby was still here because he talked about, it's interesting, the blacks in the civil rights movement, I got attacked after a school board meeting about this, it's so funny. But, because I said integration, and on the board, it's on record, you can watch it. I said integration is racist. And my point is, most blacks, especially if they're older and they live through the civil rights movement, everybody hates segregation, it's racist. To say legally, you have talent, you can come here because of your skin color, you can't come in. We're all against that. But they weren't necessarily fighting for integration. They didn't want, Bob Woodson left the movie because he didn't agree with forced busing. He's like, that's saying that white is better, so fixing my school's not good enough, or at the time, the schools were fine. Kenwood Dunbar is very famous for that. But you're saying white is better, so let's bus the kids to that school because those schools are better. And we need integration. But there was every action has a reaction, so there was a negative to that. So let's just do again some simple math. We all made it through school before they started forcing this stuff. So you got a majority black school, let's say it's moderate or doing well, and you have a white school. Now integration comes and you got to bus kids around. But let's be real, they don't bus kids both ways. So they bus the black kids there, they're not busing the white kids over there. So what happens when this majority black school had 700 students and now it has 300? They don't need as many teachers, right? But come on, obviously the white school then hires all the teachers they let go, right? No, they don't hire. So what happens to all the black teachers? So why is it that now I can go to hypothetically, I don't know for sure, but let's assume that there's a suburb of some major city that has 85% black students and their teachers are 85% white. How that happened? They weren't 85% white 40 years ago. Your fix did that. So even if you're right that black kids need to see black faces, you took the black faces because you said the white faces were superior. Let's have a real conversation about education and race.
And it's such a it's such a, what is the word? Hypocrisy? Yeah. Because, in folks who found schools that champion school choice.
And then they don't want it.
So we did a survey of all of the black school founders, and of course they're black. So they founded this school. So that's a notch up, because the research does show that if, black kids succeed better if they have a black teacher, it's a black man. Oh my God.
How about that males, right?
The academic outcomes for these kids are like through the roof.
Right.
But say, oh my goodness, well, why don't you have that black teacher go found a school? That's not a part of the conversation. But most of these black school founders, they have majority black staff. They have the largest percentage of black males who are employed at their school versus the public school. Now, of course, that's by ratio. And so it's pretty interesting to see. And so these kids are knocking it out of the park just because of that.
Right. Well, I'm going to read a couple of these. So one here says, is there reform to allow public school boards to charter their own schools within the school district itself and to get around the union? Because in some places, charters cannot be sponsored without creating a separate school board. Obviously it's situational, but you all do a good enough job for that. So I don't usually beat up the union, not that they don't deserve it because there's other people that do that. But this is one of the cases where, like I talked about Ian's school. Ian had a workaround or his school wouldn't exist. So New York and Chicago, I left Chicago, went to New York, both cities had a ban on charge. You couldn't open any new schools. So there you go with your money following the kids. There's no place for them to go. So what Ian did that was genius is most charters is one charter of K through 12. But it's too much work for you educators in here to do that. So people only use a portion of the charter. So the school was K through 8. So Ian was like, Tanisha, you got a charter already that goes K through 8. You don't want to do high school, right? Why don't I piggyback on your charter and open a high school? Yeah. It was legal and the union sued him. He won, but that's the only way he was able to take it. He could not have a new charter because there was a moratorium on it. So it kind of depends on where you are. But my question to Ian was, going back to the numbers I did, million kids in New York City, 800,000 now, million kids, you want to open a school, academic excellence, 100 and change kids, and they sued you. Well, what impact could you have to hurt them. It's 100 kids. And drop in a bucket. Why do they care? Like, even if you fail, you couldn't do any worse than the other school, and it's only 100 kids, right? But he was like, because their unions are strong, they don't want any competition, and it's because they can afford to. It was a nuisance lawsuit. It was hope that they would go away, and then we could do, because you've all heard this. We don't like charters, private, and all these other schools, because if you let the money follow the kid, we're taking away the money from the school. But that's not totally untrue, right? Right, it would do that. But my question isn't whether it takes the money, right, YouTube? The question is competition. I know they don't like capitalism. Well, what are you doing? Because let's be real. We just talked about the parents. They're unplugged. They just need a place to drop the kid off. So I have a free place that will take my kid for 12 hours a day. It's 3 blocks from my house and it's free. Why the hell would I take my kid out of that school to go a half a mile or 2 miles to another school? Except for there's something wrong with this school. You have a built-in advantage. You're a zone school that's close and you're free. I wouldn't take my kid out even if they gave me the money. It's extra work. I gotta find the school. I gotta vet it. Why would I do that? You must be doing so bad that I'm willing to put all this effort in, take my kid out and put him somewhere else. So the issue isn't the money, it's your performance. Stop failing and they won't take the kids as good. But they don't have the energy for that, so they just say it's unfair. And they use the words very well. So they say, you're taking the money from the kids, and then people join them.
Well,
So-
you can't get, there's no other, I don't know, organization I can think of where you can completely fail at your job and never get fired.
Meteorology.
And not, oh, well, maybe.
I found, sorry for the meteorologist. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's gonna snow tomorrow. It didn't. Give me my check.
The teachers unions have made it nearly impossible to fire a teacher.
Right.
Nearly impossible. It's like, you should be evaluated by the performance of these. Are these kids capable of doing what they're supposed to be capable of doing? But, abolish the teachers unions. It's a hard one. We got to play the long game on that one. We got to play, the reality is it took Republicans 50 years to make a difference when it came to Roe v. Wade. However you feel about that doesn't matter, but the point is we've got to be committed to a long-term plan. We can't just be sitting here going like, let's pull our kids out and, pretend the whole thing's going to go away. No,
That makes it worse.
suffering. Yeah, it makes it worse.
You got any more questions, Sim? I think I got a few more minutes. And these people were really specific. They literally said to Denisha, well, to Christy, this is one for both. What do you feel is the least common denominator in working towards education success? And they gave some examples: family engagement or inclusion, school choice, the educator selection, all that kind of stuff.
The least common denominator?
Yeah, what I'm assuming they mean, you can clarify me if I'm wrong in the room still.
Okay.
Like, what is of these list of things that affect education, which one do you think is lacking the most in education?
Or the easiest?
Family, am I wrong?
Yeah, you're spot on. So I have a lot of conversations like this amongst my peers, and when we talk about this common denominator, it kind of goes to like Maslow's hierarchy. It's like, what is that base that we can start with to start somewhere? Because a lot of this is like a school choice, and we've got all of these different things that we can focus on.
Well, this is a good one. I think we're all going to say 3 separate things.
It's a collectively doing.
Let's go this way. So you first.
Me first.
What is that?
Well, I am biased, and you say Maslow's hierarchy. I got my master's in social work, so I am a little biased to whole child. And so I think that it is important for schools to see the whole kid, I benefited from a faith-based education, which inherently did that. So I think there are a lot of school models, KIPP school model. There's some chain of private schools that are doing that. Because especially when you're talking about serving vulnerable kids that already come in with so many needs, they do need that. And they need that sense of community and culture. Yeah.
I thought I had an answer, but then your last piece kind of threw me off, so I might have to adjust it a bit. In the sense that you said, what is the least common denominator on the card? But you said, what can we do? So the answer might be different between what regular people can do and which one is the most lacking. So I'm gonna try to address both quickly. Based on the card, most lacking, I would say this, and there's a reason for it. I would say the educator, right? It's the hardest, but that's because they're not the most important, but they're most important in the situation we're in now. Because we just all agree that the parents are unplugged, it's daycare. So that being the case, if the educator was better we still would be better off, because if I'm dropping them off to a passionate, well-educated educator who cares about their success, they're really good at their job, and they're not using the friends, then even with the parent who's unplugged, they'll get something out of it.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I'm gonna probably say the one that's missing the most is a well-trained, educated educator. So to the principal that told me, the number one thing is to get to the education school and change the way the teachers are trained. That person was correct. So that would say that from what's missing the most. But what can we do the most? That's a different answer, because obviously we as normals can't just knock on the Department of the education school at some university and say, teach differently. So what we can do is probably think of yourself individually and where your talents lie and do that. So some of you are older and busy and you got your things, or you're later in life and you retire, you're not gonna go out and physically walk the streets, but you got a little bit of money. So write Black Minds Matter and see a check. We'll do the work for you, just cut me a check, right? Others speak a lot. They have a talent for speech, so going around speaking. I already said that everybody, regardless of where you are, need to talk to people in your circle. You can do that. You can run for school board, because you mentioned that, and I'm on the school board, and I'm like, yeah, you don't have as much power as you think you do, but you have a bully pulpit. People look at you as an elected official, and you get to do school visits and assessments. So I get to go into every school, meet with the principal, walk the school, and I get to affect the small, in my district, the capital budget. So you're gonna listen to me as a principal, because if you want something fixed in your school, you gotta come through me, right? So that plays a part, but also, I mean, you can get information without a FOIA request. So you can get it if you do a FOIA request. I can just say, I'm from the CEC, send me this information, they'll send it. So there are things that matter, so you can do that. You can run for office. If you have kids, you need to be engaged with your kids and what they're doing. Help your friends who have kids. There's a lot of things you can do, but you just need to be doing, the key is, are you doing something? When I say do something, I mean in the real world, not Twitter. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm mad at you because I had an answer and then you blew it to pieces. So now I have to change my answer. But I would say, if I'm not mistaken, statistically, the thing that makes the most difference and brings everything up is parental involvement. Also one of the hardest things to deal with, right, to control. But you talked about leadership, and I'm actually licensed as a leadership trainer for teams and entrepreneurs and organizations. And that should have been my answer. But it's because everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yep.
I mean, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is the leaders that make the difference. And it's trying to recruit, healthy leaders. I mean, maybe I said this before, but if we could just take a moment to acknowledge, right, that 24-year-olds, right, out of university, are the ones teaching your children how to manage their emotions.
Yeah.
We need to fire bad teachers too. We need to, since you're talking about leaders, even if, I don't care how strong the union is, see, this is one thing you need to do like them. So you may, like I said earlier, that the unions sued Ian because they didn't want them open. They lost, the school's open, but it cost them time, effort, whatever. So you knew, you got a bad teacher, fire him. Is he going to win the arbitration? Maybe, but for that 3 months, he's not in the classroom. Fire. I don't care, right? You got to do it. I mean, because think about it, these are people, and you're affecting their lives in a negative fashion. You can't have that toxicity around your kids. Two last questions, one for each of you. For Denisha, what are some successes you've seen in your nonprofit? Black Minds Matters, to name it.
Yeah.
Go Google and give us some money. Go ahead.
So some of the successes, I can't champion the Black school founders enough. I get a kick out of it. And one of the reasons why is because they're education entrepreneurs, and this new wave across the country, we know that school choice empowers students. It makes a difference in students' lives. It empowers parents. But we forgot about the educator, and we forget that people who found these environments, they're education entrepreneurs. And so to coin that and give them that credit is so remarkable. And then to support them, to highlight their stories, to find out more about who they are and where they come from. The majority of them, not just Black, writ large, are from the public school system. They used to teach in public schools, and they reached the tipping point where they got so frustrated and said, I can do this better, to your point. And to the other point that somebody asked about management organizations for charters, there's this one school in particular in Maryland. They were having a hard time opening their charter school. The school board wouldn't approve their application. And so they decided to start their own charter management organization. They found that it would be easier to create a charter management organization first, then open their charter school under their charter management organization.
Yeah.
And so the folks who are these entrepreneurs, they're coming up with so many creative ways to combat the teachers union, to combat the status quo. And the more competition that we have, the better. And these folks are not just, you know, people in the rural communities. We often hear, oh, these big companies are going to come into our rural town and take over our schools, and we only have one. And that's not the case. Like, all of these folks who are starting schools across the country, whatever background they have, they're of the community. They most of the time have a passion for where they grew up, the people in their neighborhoods and their communities, and they want to make a difference. So that's probably one of my most prized successes, just to share their stories. And
Chrissy, last question to you.
Sure.
It looks like I wrote this. He said, so how do we, as women in Arizona, feels like me, how do we get more involved with organizations like Independent Women's Forum?
That's great. You come to me.
You come to me, there you go.
Independent Women's Forum. Yeah, I mean, we are a grassroots movement of women across the country, and I just love my job. I get to go from state to state and recruit and train and serve some of the most vibrant, intelligent, successful women that you will ever meet. And so it's showing up. That's the answer. Show up, right? Show up at the school boards. Show up at meetings like this. Just start slowly getting to know people and get good at networking. I mean, Kevin, we've met a couple of times now. We're besties, right? Like, you just show up. Just start showing up.
There you go.
That's the answer.
Chrissy Narcy, Denisha Allen. Thank you. Kevin Jackson.